Tunisia, March 1943. A German sentry named Hans Weber is crouching in a foxhole. He's a veteran. He's fought the British. He's fought the Americans. And he knows the sounds of the desert. But tonight, the silence isn't peaceful. It's heavy. He doesn't know it yet, but the men moving toward his line aren't there to capture ground. They aren't there to shout commands. They are there to harvest souls. And they are carrying a weapon that will scare the Wehrmacht more than a Sherman tank. You have to understand the German mindset at this specific moment. This is the Afrika Korps. These men were hard. They were disciplined. They looked down on everyone who wasn't them. When they heard they were facing colonial troops from India, they laughed. They wrote them off as untrained militia. German intelligence actually listed these units as low priority. They were worried about Montgomery's tanks. They were worried about American artillery. They didn't spare a single sentence for the 5'4" mountain men hiking up the ridgeline. And that arrogance was about to get a lot of good German boys killed. Back to Hans in that foxhole. He sees movement. Not a squad, not a patrol, just 4 shadows. They are low to the ground. They are moving fast. But here is the thing that freezes his blood. They aren't making a sound. Not a boot scrape on rock. Not a canteen rattle. Hans raises his Mauser rifle. He has a clear shot, but he doesn't take it. Why? Because the lead shadow turns and looks right at him. Hans realizes in that split second, he knows I'm here, and he's letting me live. The shadows vanish behind the German lines. Hans thinks he's lucky. 5 minutes later, the screaming starts. It's not a battle cry. It's the sound of panic in the rear echelon. By morning, Hans learns the truth. His corporals, 30 yards down the line, gone. His throat opened with surgical precision. The ammunition dump, sabotaged. The shadows were gone before the first flare even hit the sky. This was the Wehrmacht's introduction to the Gurkha, and the war just changed. Now, if you enjoy deep dives into military history that respects the men on the ground, do me a favor and like this video. It helps us preserve these stories. Now ask yourself, why were the Germans so rattled? They had faced commandos. They had faced the French Foreign Legion. It was the size difference. To a German soldier raised on propaganda about the Aryan master race, physical stature equaled combat prowess. They expected giants. Instead, they got men who stood shoulder high to a Bavarian farm boy. But it was the equipment that terrified them most. The British had bayonets. The Americans had kabars. The Gurkhas carried the kukri, an 18-inch forward curving blade that is top-heavy. It's designed for chopping wood, clearing brush, and removing heads. We found a letter from a German soldier named Anton Richter. He wrote home saying, "We call them the little devils. You don't hear them. You just wake up and your bunkmate is dead. It is better to face a tank. You can hear a tank." Let me tell you about a specific tactic the Gurkhas used that drove the Germans to the brink of insanity. It's called the boot check. At night in the desert, everyone looks the same. Shadows are shadows. So how do you tell friend from foe in absolute pitch blackness without speaking? The Gurkhas realized the Germans wore jack boots or high-laced boots tied a specific way. The British and Indian troops laced their gaiters differently. So, a Gurkha would crawl into a foxhole, completely silent, and feel the sleeping soldier's boots. If the laces felt British, he moves on. If the laces felt German, that soldier never woke up. Think about the psychological toll that takes on a man. You can't sleep. You can't close your eyes. You know that someone might be crawling toward you right now just to feel your shoelaces. That level of stress breaks armies faster than artillery. By late 1942, the German High Command couldn't ignore the reports anymore. General Rommel was no fool. He saw the casualty reports coming in from the sectors held by the Indian 4th Division. A confidential memo went out to unit commanders. It essentially said, "Stop treating these men as colonial militia. Treat them with the same caution you would treat the British Guards or our own paratroopers. That is a massive admission of failure from a regime obsessed with racial superiority. At Ruwaisat Ridge, a German battalion slammed into the Gurkha lines. They expected them to break. They expected them to surrender once they were flanked. That's what the manual said inferior troops do. Instead, the Gurkhas threw down their rifles and drew their knives. A German officer reported that when his men saw the steel flash, the charge faltered. It wasn't a firefight anymore. It was a brawl. The Gurkhas took 100% casualties in that sector. They didn't retreat 1 inch, and this is where the German respect began to form. You see, soldiers know the truth. Politicians talk about ideology. Soldiers talk about courage. And the Germans realized these men aren't fighting for the King of England. They are fighting for their own honor. The war moved to Italy. If you think the desert was bad, the mountains were worse. This was defensive warfare at its peak. The Germans had dug into the Gothic line. They had the high ground. They had the machine guns. The terrain was impassable. Vertical cliffs, loose shale. No American or British unit could move up those slopes without being slaughtered. So the Allied commanders looked at the maps, looked at the mountains, and sent in the boys from the Himalayas. The 1st Battalion, 9th Gurkha Rifles, was tasked with taking a hill that the Germans considered secure. The Germans were sleeping soundly. They had guards on the paths, but they didn't guard the cliffs because no human could climb that at night. The Gurkhas didn't use the paths. They climbed the sheer rock face, in the dark, with weapons. When the sun came up, the Germans looked out of their bunkers expecting to see empty slopes. Instead, they saw hundreds of Gurkhas sitting on the rocks, cleaning their rifles, looking down at them. The position fell in 20 minutes. There is a myth that Gurkhas never took prisoners, that they were bloodthirsty savages. German propaganda tried to push this narrative to make their own soldiers fight harder. They told their men, if you surrender to the Indians, they will eat you. The reality was far more damaging to the German worldview. When German soldiers were captured by Gurkhas, they weren't tortured. They were treated with a strict professional indifference. A German sergeant named Otto Becker wrote about his capture near Monte Cassino. He was terrified. He saw the kukri on his captor's belt and thought, this is it. He started trembling. The Gurkha looked at him, laughed, sheathed his knife, and offered him a cigarette. He said in broken English, "War finished for you. You lucky." Becker wrote that he felt ashamed. He realized he wasn't dealing with a monster. He was dealing with a professional who was simply better at war than he was. We have to talk about the battle cry. Every army has one. The Marines have Ura. The paratroopers have Kurahi. The Gurkhas have Ayo Gorkali. It means, the Gurkhas are upon you. Ludwig Hartmann, a German infantryman, wrote about hearing this cry in the middle of a mortar barrage. He said it didn't sound like men screaming in anger. It sounded like joy. That is what broke the German spirit. They were fighting men who seemed to enjoy the impossible odds. At Monte Cassino, the monastery, the fighting was hand-to-hand for weeks. It was a meat grinder. The Germans held on with a fanaticism that is hard to overstate. They were the best defensive fighters in the war. But for every German who was willing to die for the fatherland, there was a Gurkha willing to die because his grandfather had done it, his father had done it, and he wasn't going to be the one to break the chain. A German officer captured there said, "I can fight the British. I can fight the Americans. They fight for ground. But these men, they fight as if death is a promotion." Now here is the strange part of war, the part that Hollywood doesn't always get right. When you fight someone who is truly formidable, you stop hating them, you start respecting them. Let's go back to Hans Weber. He survived the war. He went back to a Germany that was in ruins. He rebuilt his life. But in 1958, he gave an interview to a local paper. The reporter asked him about the Americans, the Russians, the French. Hans shrugged. Then the reporter asked, "Who was the best?" Hans didn't hesitate. He said, "The little men from the mountains, the Gurkhas." He told the reporter, "I didn't hate them. I admired them. They did exactly what a soldier is supposed to do. No politics, no complaining, just efficiency. If Germany had one division of Gurkhas, maybe the outcome in Russia would have been different." That is the highest praise a German soldier could give. We need to put a number on this bravery. You know the Medal of Honor. The British equivalent is the Victoria Cross. It is incredibly hard to earn. Most are awarded posthumously. In World War II, Gurkha regiments earned 10 Victoria Crosses. Think about that. 250,000 men served. But the density of heroism in these units was mathematically higher than almost any other Commonwealth force. Take the story of Rifleman Ganju Lama. In Burma, not against Germans, but against the Japanese, who were equally feared, he took out 2 enemy tanks with a Piat anti-tank gun, while he had a broken wrist and 2 other wounds. He crawled forward toward the tanks. The Germans in Italy heard rumors of these things. They heard the stories from the other theaters. It created a psychological cage. When a German unit heard they were rotating to a sector held by the Gurkhas, morale dropped instantly. They knew there would be no quiet nights. There is a deep cultural reason why the Gurkhas broke the Wehrmacht's brain. The German military tradition was Prussian. It was rigid. It was top-down, order above all. The Gurkha tradition is tribal. It is based on Isat, honor. If a German officer dies, the unit might freeze waiting for orders. If a Gurkha officer dies, the riflemen just get angrier. They don't need orders to attack. They need orders to stop attacking. The Germans couldn't calculate for that variable. You can predict tactics. You cannot predict ferocity. And remember, these men weren't fighting for their own homes. Kathmandu wasn't being bombed. They were volunteers. This confused the Germans the most. Why die for the British? The answer the Gurkhas gave was always the same. Because I gave my word. To a German generation that watched their own leaders break treaties and lie repeatedly. That kind of simple integrity was blinding. This wasn't just a World War II story. This spirit didn't die in 1945. In the Falklands, the Argentinians surrendered in droves when they heard the Gurkhas were coming. In Afghanistan, the Taliban avoided sectors held by the Royal Gurkha Rifles. Even Prince Harry, who served with them, said there is no safer place to be than standing next to a Gurkha. But the Germans were the first modern, mechanized army to really test that steel, and they shattered against it. Hans Weber ended his letter to his brother in 1944 with a warning. He said, "Pray you do not see them. If you see the knife, it is already too late. Just pray." The war ended. The bunkers were filled in. The desert wind covered the tracks. But in the regimental histories of the German army, there is a permanent scar left by the boys from Nepal. They proved that technology, heavy armor, and racial theories are nothing compared to the human spirit when it is disciplined and fearless. If you believe that warrior spirit matters more than the flag on the shoulder, you're in the right place. We cover the stories that history books sometimes glaze over. I've got another video right here about how American Marines earned the respect of the Japanese. It's a similar story of enemies becoming admirers. Click that one next. It's a powerful watch. I'll see you there.